But, yes, okay. I'm Ross Hetrick, president of the Thaddeus Stevens Society. And you may also see me roaming around with a really bad wig sometimes, portraying Thaddeus Stevens. Not today, though. Some people are disappointed about that. Okay. But I want to tell you, we had a seminar yesterday in Lancaster as part of this celebration where I mentioned that Thaddeus Stevens had been in 3 movies, which I said probably was the only member of the House of Representatives who ever got to be in 3 movies. 3 movies meaning he was a character in 3 movies. And then someone emailed me afterwards and he said, "You forgot Davy Crockett." And I thought that's a pretty good thing. And as many of you maybe remember, how Davy Crockett started this coonskin cap fad. So maybe Thaddeus Stevens could start this ugly wig fad. So you see all these little kids with ugly wigs and such like that. Before we begin, I would also like to recognize Alex Paul Loza of Tennessee. Wave your hands, Paul. Alex. He's right there. He is the genius that has made this statue, and I really think he's going to be the next Michelangelo of the United States. Okay. So, without further ado, I'd like to recognize our new mayor, Rita Freeling, for a few minutes.
Thank you, Roy. Thank you, everyone, and welcome, visitors, and also the citizens of Gettysburg. I'm so glad you can be part of this. I know you're going to hear more about Thaddeus Stevens today. However, remember the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th Amendment.
Yeah, the microphone should be a little closer to your mouth.
Okay.
That's that.
Okay. People can't hear me. That's a rarity. Let's start from the beginning. I'll wrap it up quick. Welcome, visitors, and also citizens of Gettysburg to this momentous event. This is the second statue of Thaddeus Stevens. And of course, you're going to learn more and more about Thaddeus Stevens, but also remember he was instrumental in the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. That without, we wouldn't be here today, and I wouldn't be where I am today. So thank you, Mr. Stevens. That's just reality. And I have to say, I was talking to somebody else. They said, well, he was a lawyer. I said, so am I. You can't swing. But I have to say this. I really, Commissioner Feil and I were talking about when we grew up in this area, we would go to Caledonia State Park and you would drive right past Thaddeus Stevens' furnace. So I mean, he's been a part of my life. I know he's a lawyer. He has had an effect on my life as he has on most of you. Another thing, do you know that Thaddeus Stevens was instrumental with funding and starting Gettysburg College? Gettysburg College. Okay, so yes, he was instrumental in that, and he keeps saying a little bit closer. And I think one of the most interesting things, as mayor of Gettysburg, every day when I walk into my office, I pass an image of Thaddeus Stevens and just smile. Thank you.
Okay, now we're going to have Wes Heiser. And I just have to tell you real quick, when we were a very young organization, we presented that image of Thaddeus Stevens that she talked about to the Borough Council. And at that time, none of the 9 members of the council knew who Thaddeus Stevens was. And actually, they kind of hid it for about 10 years. But I am really glad to say that everybody on Borough Council knows who Thaddeus Stevens is, particularly Wes, who is a big, big admirer of Thaddeus Stevens. And he is the Borough Council president now.
All right.
Okay. Thank you. That's about as high as it can go. So
yeah, that's a good idea.
Kind of position it that direction, keep it close? Okay. Perfect. All right, good afternoon. We gather here to dedicate this statue and to appropriately recognize the contributions of Thaddeus Stevens to our community and to our nation. I'd like to thank Ross Hetrick, the president of Thaddeus Stevens Society, for inviting me here this day to speak. Ross has been really diligent over the years in trying to bring this statue here to Gettysburg. And without his perseverance, I don't think we would be here this afternoon. Thaddeus Stevens moved to the borough of Gettysburg in 1816, before the motorcycles were here. And he worked tirelessly as a leader in our community for the next 26 years. 2 centuries ago, he was elected to the borough council and unanimously chosen by its body as the president. While here, Stevens built an exemplary professional reputation as a lawyer, winning 9 of his first 10 cases to reach the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. The great commoner was a fervent champion of the oppressed and impoverished. Stevens publicly advocated for the abolition of slavery long before it was considered fashionable. While making a 4th of July toast here in 1823, he proclaimed his desire that the next president not be a slaveholder. While representing Adams County in the state legislature, Stevens obtained the charter for Pennsylvania College, now Gettysburg College, in 1832. He ensured the institution would have land, and he secured the funding for its edifice, now Pennsylvania Hall, in 1834. His most critical act while representing our county in the state legislature came in April of 1835 when he stood and delivered the speech that preserved the public education system here in Pennsylvania. Thanks to Stevens, children would have access to the education that they needed to succeed, no matter what their means. No pauper would need to swear an oath or grovel in front of the community for their children to gain entry into the schoolhouse. As a member of the House of Representatives and the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, Stevens was critical in our nation's triumph in the Civil War. He ensured that our nation's armies had the funding and tools required to destroy the rebellion in a war that was fought in these very streets and fields around us. As the final victories were won on the battlefields, Stevens guided amendments through the Congress to ensure that the Civil War was not fought in vain. The 13th Amendment, abolishing slavery, was ratified in 1865. Growing increasingly weak, the commoner's piercing wit remained sharp as he fought for equality. As father of the 14th Amendment, he gathered the votes needed in the Congress to ensure that all our people would have the equal protection of the laws. The 14th Amendment was ratified in July 1868, approximately 1 month before Stevens' death. He fought for others. He was a champion for the causes of the oppressed and destitute. He didn't shy away from the critical battles. Rather than wait for popular opinion to shift, Thaddeus Stevens forged a path that led to the better treatment of those who were in need. His efforts formed the constitutional basis for every subsequent effort to ensure equality among the people of the United States. How fitting is it that this public servant, this champion of freedom and equality, so critical to his nation, is recognized here in our town of Gettysburg. Thank you.
Okay, the next person I'd like to recognize is Randy Feil, who is the chairman of the county commissioners. And he was very, very important to this because he and his other commissioners let us put the statue here. We actually got the money and we got the statue made, and we were wondering where it's going to go. So thank you very much, Randy, for helping us find a home for Thaddeus Stevens. And it's so appropriate because he was like a super lawyer here, and now he's in front of the courthouse. So, Randy Feil.
As I begin my remarks per Ross's statement, let me recognize my 2 colleagues here today, Commissioner Jim Martin and Commissioner Marty Qualley, because it took all three of us to agree on placing and seeing the benefit of this statue, and that's why it's here today. The other thing I noticed is,
I think you got a little closer, unfortunately. Okay.
how's this?
Yeah.
Okay. The other thing I noticed is the previous speaker, Wes, his remarks were in like 11 font, and mine are like 20 font. So I don't know what that means. But it's unfortunate, but not unusual, that history on your own doorstep is sometimes ignored. This is even more prevalent in a community that is so rich in American history, such as Adams County. What makes Thaddeus Stevens so unique is his significant impact was widespread in the borough of Gettysburg, in the county of Adams, to the state of Pennsylvania, and to the nation. Whether it was forming a local water company, a bank, a railroad, iron mills, or being instrumental in the foundation of Gettysburg College. Also, as Ross informed me the other day, he owned 18,000 acres in Adams County for charcoal for his iron mill. And obviously, also for promoting public education and equal rights under the 14th Amendment. Thaddeus Stevens was a 26-year Adams County resident from 1816 to 1842 who deserves the recognition that is being bestowed today. When the proclamation from the Adams County Commissioners, which I will read in a moment, was presented to Ross at our last public meeting, he in first person, as Stevens, made two comments that I will share with you. I got them basically correct. Number one, it's a good thing that President Lincoln listened to me. Number two, concerning the dedication of the statue today, he exclaimed to the commissioners, "What took you so long?" As a lifelong Adams County resident, again, like Mayor Freeling, my knowledge of Thaddeus Stevens had to do with going to Caledonia for swimming and picnics. And what I knew about Thaddeus Stevens, which was more than a lot of Adams Countyans, was that he had a iron works, and the Confederates destroyed it on the way to Gettysburg. That was my original knowledge. It developed a little more in my adult life when my good friend, Dr. Brad Hope, gave me a copy of his book, Gettysburg, The Making of an Abolitionist. And Brad tells me it's out of print right now, so maybe we can get more demand and we'll get a second printing of that.
Woo!
As I read the proclamation for Thaddeus Stevens Dedication Day on behalf of Commissioners Martin, Commissioner Qualley, and myself, it's my satisfaction that to have notable Adams County resident and attorney Thaddeus Stevens standing for eternity in front of the Adams County Historic Courthouse. I think that should be a benefit and satisfaction to us all.
The way we have it anchored, we're never going to get it out.
Ross said it's anchored so well, we'll never get it out anyway. May this day stand as a public testament to our residents, visitors, and future generations that the core values of our society and our Constitution are resolute. So at this time, I'd like to read to you the proclamation from Adams County Board of Commissioners to the Thaddeus Stevens Society that was presented at the last meeting a week ago. Whereas Thaddeus Stevens lived in Gettysburg from 1816 to 1842 and was one of the most prominent attorneys in Pennsylvania during that time. And whereas Mr. Stevens helped build Gettysburg and Adams County by helping to start a water company, library association, a bank, a railroad, iron mills, and a college. And whereas Thaddeus Stevens helped to support the Presbyterian and Lutheran churches in Gettysburg. Whereas a speech by Thaddeus Stevens on April 11, 1835, in the Pennsylvania legislature turned back a repeal effort of the state's public education system, earning him the title of Savior of Public Education in Pennsylvania. Whereas Thaddeus Stevens was the most powerful member of Congress during and after the Civil War, and helped to legislatively destroy slavery. And whereas Thaddeus Stevens is the father of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, which requires equal treatment under the law and extends the protection of the Bill of Rights to the state level. Whereas Thaddeus Stevens Society has raised money to create a statue to honor all of Thaddeus Stevens' great achievements on behalf of humanity. And whereas the Adams County government provided a prominent space in front of the Adams County Courthouse to install that statue. Now therefore be it resolved that we, the Adams County Commissioners, hereby proclaim April 2nd, 2022 as Thaddeus Stevens Statue Dedication Day in Adams County, with the dedication of the Thaddeus Stevens statue to be held Saturday, April 2nd, 2022 at 2 p.m. in front of the Adams County Courthouse. In witness thereof, we herewith set our hands and cause the great seal of the County of Adams to be affixed this 23rd day of March, 2022. Thank you.
I just wanted to mention, it's rather appropriate that Thad's right down the street from Lincoln. Like we don't have enough Lincoln statues, okay? But anyway, it's right down the street, and as you sort of alluded to, the Union was blessed with two political geniuses, Abraham Lincoln and Thaddeus Stevens. And the genius of Lincoln was that he listened to Thaddeus Stevens. So the next person I want to introduce is really important, okay? There was 3 stages in us getting the statue here. The first stage was me getting mad because a Lincoln statue was put in front of Stevens Hall on Gettysburg College. And I said, that is outrageous. And it became clear that if we were going to get a statue, we had to get our own statue, okay? And so I started a fundraiser, and I figured I'd be doing fundraising for about the next 10 years. And in about 3 years, we started in 2015, and by 2018, we were up to about $11,000, but we had to get up to $55,000. And so, kind of out of the blue, and I'm sure Mike can tell you more, is he sends me an email and says, how much more do you need? And I said, $39,500, and he says, you got it. So, that was now, there was a third important step in getting the statue, and that was when we were searching for a sculptor. And we put out a national plea for proposals, and we got one from Paul Loza, and it was amazing. It was everything we wanted. We wanted to capture the dynamic spirit of Thaddeus Stevens, his relentlessness, and I have to say, Alex, you kind of fell in love with Thaddeus Stevens, right? So that passion shows through in his statue. So I'll turn it over to Mike now. You want me to put it here?
We'll see what works.
Okay. Get close.
Okay. Can you all hear me?
Yeah. Yes.
Great. First, I think we ought to give a special round of applause to Ross. Not only for his hard work with developing the statue, but anyone who's done a 3-day event and having to deal with every small logistics really deserves a round of applause.
Yeah, right.
But there's something else about the Thaddeus Stevens Society. About 3.5 years ago, the 150th anniversary of the 14th Amendment was coming up. And given the 14th Amendment's commitment to equal protection of the law, given its 14th Amendment commitment for birthright citizenship, given the 14th Amendment's section that says no insurrectionist should serve in the federal government, given the later interpretations that led to the end of racial segregation, and Brown versus Board of Education, the legalizing of abortion through Roe versus Wade, the legalization of contraception through Griswold, Connecticut, and the legalizing of gay marriage. You would think that some national organization would celebrate such profound changes in the Constitution of the United States. Not the ACLU or the NAACP or other organizations, but one organization, the Thaddeus Stevens had a special celebration to honor the 14th Amendment. So I look to Ross as not only a fountain of knowledge, but also a strategic developer of how we carry on the importance of Thaddeus Stevens. I first heard of Thaddeus Stevens in high school when the history teacher defined him as a fanatic. And then I found out that his fanaticism was for the immediate end of chattel and racial slavery and the distribution of land to the freed people. And I realized at that time the real fanatics were Jefferson Davis and Robert E. Lee, who fought a war that led to 700,000 deaths. We must reevaluate even today what is freedom and what is fanaticism as we move on. I always look forward to thinking about Thaddeus Stevens because he wasn't like a politician today who would look at the public opinion polls and create a certain message to get another 3% of the vote in order to win a tough race. He was someone that had a principled conviction all his life against white supremacy and against slavery and making sure there was equality in this nation. But there's something else that stood out about Thaddeus Stevens. Sure, there are many people, not often in government, that have decent principles, but how many actually ascend and able to use a pragmatic way to make his policies effective? In December 1865, the Confederates wanted to come back into this government. And we saw what they did, not only in their past, but the recently enacted black codes of inequality in the South. Well, Thaddeus Stevens was real strategic and made sure that the clerk of the U.S. House of Representatives didn't call their names.
And the clerk was Edward McPherson from Gettysburg.
All right. Sorry, I don't know all the local color, but I think Ross is on my back to make sure. So what that meant was, it's hard to believe, but the Congressional Radical Republicans had a working majority. I repeat that, a working majority, which is the total necessity to actually get anything done. You can make all the great points, but if you don't have a working majority, you can't get stuff done. And did Thaddeus Stevens and the Radical Republicans get stuff done? More than we can really imagine. Probably in those 2 years, more profound changes that ever took place in the history of the United States, even probably, though it's debatable, more than the New Deal. They made sure that not only the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment passed, but they set up a series of Reconstruction laws that said if you wanted to get back into this country as a Confederate state, you had to do a whole bunch of stuff and giving black men the right to vote. Before the 15th Amendment. And what that meant was that 500,000 African American men voted in the election of 1868 and voted for many of them, their commanders, because Thaddeus Stevens had agitated with Frederick Douglass to not only get Lincoln to push for the Emancipation Proclamation, but to make sure that free and escaped slaves could become part of the U.S. Army. And these colored troops fought for their own liberation and helped defeat the South, came home and persuaded some reluctant white people that they deserved the right to vote. And then in 1868, 500,000 free African-American male voted for Grant with a turnout of 80%, and was able to defeat the 1868 Democratic candidate Horatio Seymour, whose slogan was, "This is a white man's country. White men should rule." And to use a phrase from today, no dog whistles there. Now, if we look at what Thaddeus Stevens accomplished, he helped create the Freedmen's Bureau so that people could actually learn how to read and write and develop their own destiny. He made sure that through these state constitutions that divorce was changed, roads were built, people could serve on juries, and 1,500 to 2,000 African-American elected officials were elected. So he had a profound effect on day-to-day life. And it wasn't until a sector of the white Republican Party turned against these changes, partly because he proposed that should not only have political equality, but also economic equality. And that's why when my wife, C.J. Prentice, and I walked our dog named Thaddeus, we were able to say to people when they asked, "Why'd you name him Thaddeus?" We were able to give like a short description of how we not only needed political equality, which is fairly self-evident, but you needed economic equality. In other words, the freed people needed to be able to have their own power and their own land. But that never took place. And if it did take place, we would have a whole different country. Can you imagine if we had economic equality, no racial gap, and the whole society would be transformed into a sector of equality? Now, my wife also stands out now. She doesn't know I'm going to say this, but she's one of the only people living who voted to ratify the 14th Amendment. How could that happen? She was a senator in the Ohio General Assembly, and somehow someone discovered Ohio never ratified the 14th Amendment. So they had a vote. She voted for the 14th Amendment, we lived in Cleveland and she worked in Columbus, and when she came back, she said, she told me what happened. I said, "What was the vote?" One person voted against it. Ironically, his wife is now in the Ohio General Assembly, and she's the lead sponsor of one of those laws that says you're going to lose your teacher's license if you teach about racism. The legacy of Thaddeus Stevens is not only to bring pride to Gettysburg, to serve as a beacon when people from all over the country visit Gettysburg and they can find out the power of Thaddeus Stevens, but it's even something deeper. As the protests against the murder of George Floyd spread across the country, there arose a movement to get rid of the images of our racist past. The Confederate statues, the names of buildings, and that's all important. But the symbol of Thaddeus Stevens says that we need to recognize people who fought against racism, white supremacy, and for equality, so people can understand it's not enough to just try to wipe out symbols of white supremacy. We must hold up freedom fighters all over the country who actually are willing to be there. So in closing, what I hope happens is in every small town, in every city, people get together and find out their own local freedom fighter, to be able to give the kind of leadership that the Thaddeus Stevens Society did in Gettysburg, so that when people drive, when they visit, when they learn in their textbooks, as the Zinn Education Project is doing, to understand Reconstruction and what's really important. And we know that we will have shortly a cadre of 15 or 20 teachers named after C.J. Prentice and Michael Charney, the C.J. Prentice Fellows, who will go around the country and spread the word that understanding textbooks and understanding curricula against white supremacy is not enough. What we need to do is figure out how everyone in their own local community can be as powerful as the Thaddeus Stevens Society, form their own societies dedicated to remembering freedom fighters, and then we can actually begin to, we've already begun, we can even deepen the removal of the stain that Thaddeus Stevens fought every day of his life to end, a legacy of equality and a commitment to undoing white supremacy, not only by ending slavery, not only by ending, by redistributing land, but also by having a society that prides itself that we are really a society of equality. Thank you very much.
That was incredibly eloquent. In fact, if you were a little younger, I'd probably try to get you to be president of the Thaddeus Stevens Society. I think you'd be a good person.
Now we can do it by Zoom.
But as a token of our appreciation, I want to present to you a book that was printed in 1869.
Clearly not for people who are old and can't read. It's small print.
It's memorial addresses on the life and character of Thaddeus Stevens. Let's see, House of Representatives. And this is my particular favorite quote about Thaddeus Stevens that I'm going to read. It's pretty short. And this was by Congressman Donald. And he said, he never, he never stepped down upon the lower plane of popular error, but at all times and on all occasions he dared to do right, looking heaven in the face and fearing no man. He never flattered the people. He never attempted to deceive them. He never flattered with them in a double sense. He never courted and encouraged their errors. On the contrary, on all occasions, he attacked their sins. He assailed their prejudices. He outraged all their bigotries. And when they turned upon him and attacked him, he marched straight forward like Gulliver, wading through the fleets of the Lilliputians, dragging his enemies after him into the great harbor of truth.
Yeah.
Thank you. Right. Thank you. Right. And now wait when it's in the audio book. Okay.
So what we are going to do now is we are all going to make our way down to the statue, and we're going to have an unveiling. Okay, and I just want you to know, we have a chain around the statue, and Thaddeus Stevens was known as the Great Unchained of Adams County. So I will be removing the chain and unchaining him, and Mike will do the honors of unveiling him. And then you can all line up for selfies.